brilliant. Thanks so much.
Okay, everyone can hear me? Wonderful. My name's Greg Ferenstein. Thank you so much for joining us, which I think is the last panel of the day. So we're going to try to keep it a little upbeat, a little exciting. And so I wanted to start with just kind of like a philosophical question. There was a famous book in the United States, in a science fiction book, in which government officials just started life. They tracked and they made public everything that they did. Every word they said, every email they sent, everyone they met with. And the argument in this book was that that would make you a better person, and that would lead to the elimination of all corruption. And so just kind of a philosophical question to all the panelists. I mean, let's think about that world. A world in which everyone a government official met with, every email they sent, everything they said, everything they made, was entirely public. Do you think that would be a better government? Sir.
From what I know, we're so far from it that I would favor this. I believe it would be, we should at least try to do something like that, because so far it's completely opaque, completely not transparent. I mean, we had a regulation in France which tried to push for more transparency, and it went completely midway, and I think we have a long road to go until we get to where you...
Okay, but let's not dodge this.
I think it's probably better.
Why would it be better? Why do we need secrets at all? It's just a philosophical question. Why does the government need secrets?
I think that the notion of secrets, it's just an excuse to make these people make what they want, But we don't even know if it wouldn't work, because no government is working that way. So I believe it would deserve a try, and I don't see the reason why it should not work. At least at, I would say, the parliament, at some, maybe if you were to talk about national defense, everybody understands that we would need some secrets. At the health system, you don't want people to have their file opened, and there are a few issues like this, but most of the time it can be transparent. I was in favor of the transparency for all the restaurants that the member of parliament could do. And
all the what?
The restaurants,
all the restaurants.
Expenses.
Oh, so every time a politician went to a restaurant, it would be public information. Is there a lot of restaurant corruption?
Yeah, and I pushed it big time because I had 100,000 voters, people who voted in favor of this idea. And the feedback I've got from the member of parliament were just amazing. They found any type of excuses until to I need to meet my mistress or whatever, And I heard everything I could hear.
Wait, no, hold on one second. You can't just yada over that. A politician literally said, "I don't want that public because I want to meet my mistress."
I've heard that, yeah. I've heard that. I promise you, I've heard that. Yeah, but
that's a thing.
Yeah, they said, I don't want to, I will not want to reimburse the expenses if I meet my mistress, but I want to make sure that I can keep that private. And I told these people, but don't be a member of parliament. and we had a scandal at the Senate recently, a few weeks ago, which proved that these people basically stole some money from everyone, actually. And the answer that they gave to the citizen was just completely unbelievable. They said, we're not really well paid, and it's normal that we get a lot of money, pocket money expenses, things like that. And I think we need transparency. I would definitely favor the idea of complete transparency for these people.
Okay, so to summarize, we have one person on the panel for complete transparency, and the objection to that is because they want to hide thievery and prostitution. Or not prostitution, but adultery.
Not prostitution.
But adultery.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm afraid I might express some regional bias now, since I come from Latin America, from Brazil. But I don't believe in the full transparency formula in itself. And in my region of the world, to refer to one colleague from Argentina, Professor Perez Linha, there has been something he's dubbed the political economy of outrage, which means people keep exploring scandals on political basis, just to have votes. I mean, transparency can be bad in some contexts, although I would be for transparency overall, broadly speaking, but we should be very careful in relating ourselves with this idea. And I find this perspective of having politicians who fully disclose information about their day-to-day lives somewhat utopian.
We're at a tech conference.
Yeah, I'm a bit afraid of embracing this idea. It sounds like Black Mirror, you know, the TV series, a little bit. So I would be reluctant into, I don't know, adopting this formula to its last consequences. I should add to this first statement, and don't take me bad, I'm pro-transparency, but this forum is very much, I'd say, machine-oriented, and there's a reason for that. But we sometimes may be missing the mark. There's a lot about state-society relations we are not covering, we are not talking about. When it comes to my region, to Latin America, I have this feeling that even if you have access to high-tech apparatuses, to machines, they won't convert our societies into fully transparent, accountable societies. We should, take a step back and think of our relations, state-society relations. So that's the point I would like to make at first.
Great. Okay, so if those of you keeping track, we got 1-1 for full transparency on the panel. And now we have someone who may break the tie. Well, you're going to break the tie, but for how?
Well, I think there's a good reason for why we have to ask this question today. For our generation, who grew up having these little things, thinking that every kind of information is supposed to be available and exposed to us, the lack of trust in the political system globally declined tremendously because we suddenly realized that political systems are not, and those who are making the most important decisions about our lives are not really accountable for what they're doing. So this lack of trust created a greater demand for transparency. We see this in my country, in Israel, for the last few years. 6 years ago, an entire generation in Israel went to the street to protest for social justice. And with this protest, I was one of the organizers of that movement. I was not in politics then. And if people asked me back then if I would ever go into politics, I would have laughed because politics is corruption. We should not be in politics. And when I eventually realized that if we want to get anything changed, we have to get into politics. So I realized that I was mistaken about the corruption in politics. There is a much higher percentage of corruption than I could imagine before I got into the system. However, what I also realized was that it was possible today with the tools that we have, it's possible to fight it. And the way to fight it is transparency. And we need to use transparency in order to shine a light on how decisions about our lives, how decisions about our tax money are being made. And the way to do that is to expose parliamentary committees, expose the way that legislation is being passed. Of course, votes of parliamentarians and ministers must be exposed.
And we'll get to that, but this is obviously a pro-transparency panel. I'm pretty sure everyone in the audience is for transparency, but just to put the framework, let's assume full transparency, every conversation, every email, every salary, completely transparent. Would that be a better government?
But you talking
salary
at the parliament or in general?
Just for parliamentarians.
Just for parliamentarians.
Just for parliamentarians. And like agencies and stuff.
Some of it must be exposed. Everything that's related to decisions, to what you do and what you say in a committee, what you say and how you pass the legislation. Of course, meeting with lobbyists and meeting with people who have
and even
foreign
the emails
interests,
sent to those
foreign
lobbyists.
Interests. Yes, and every information that you get from the lobbyist. If you need to have every call to your mother transparent, I'm not that sure. I'm not sure it would be interesting enough, I have to say. But we don't need to confuse transparency and gossip. I have to say, and I've been, in the last few years in Parliament, I exposed a lot of corruption stories and corruption in our tax money and created a new system and new standards of transparency in Parliament. And today the Israeli Parliament is one of the most transparent parliaments in the world. And yet, the way I expose corruption many times comes from people inside ministries who come to me in secret to tell me what's going on in their ministry. If they knew that my schedule is completely open, I'm not sure if they would come and let me know what's going on there. And these are the tools that allowed me to then fight corruption and create better governments. So we have to put the balance in there. I think that everything that's related to our decisions, to our expenditure in terms of political expenditure, when it comes to ministries, to meeting lobbyists, to meeting with foreign interest, all of that has to be transparent, and yes, we need to have rules about that. But we all have to put the balance in a place that would not stop us from doing our work. And again, with that, one of the ways to create transparency today that we have, and I'm not talking only about social networks and Instagram stories, for example, are practically exposing my entire schedule. But it's time consuming, I have to say. But we always have to put the balance on how we use this transparency and we use the technological tools in order to really increase the efficiency of our work and efficiency of our work in Parliament.
Excellent. So the reason I frame that is because the idea is that this is a pro-transparency panel, but do we need any secrets in government? And I'm going to go about 2 to 1, say, no, we probably shouldn't almost have any secrets. There was the president of Estonia at one time had a policy where every single email he sent, the president of Estonia, every single email he got was made public. And he was a fan of this policy. And so this kind of gets you to like the spectrum of where we can go. And so the next question to the panel is, let's say you become king of your country. You can do whatever you want as it relates to your transparency, and there's no political roadblocks, none at all. You can just do it. What would you do through transparency that you think would have the greatest impact? And when you answer, relate it to something you have seen that made a positive impact through transparency.
For me, the first thing would be to education. Education is probably very much related to engagement. And if you want to have a vibrant democratic city or country, you would need to have people who have education. And therefore, I think that...
When you say education, what do you mean?
I mean, to have the understanding of what is common, what is to be dealt with. And
so civic literacy, having kids read the news.
Yeah,
policies,
but it could
like
be
that.
also specialist, any type of education. If you want to participate to a law on, let's say, cyber government, if you are a coder, it's better to be a coder than to be a cook, for instance. So you need to have vertical skills and horizontal skills as well. So I think that what copes well with, I would say, liberties and transparency is education. So I would very much favor education.
Okay, now and the rule that went along with that question was, if you're king and you're going to make this thing, you're going to do education, civic education. Where have you seen a civically literate population improve life in your country?
In the northern countries, if you were to think about Sweden, Norway, all these countries have very good education, a lot of transparency in the system, and it works pretty well.
But you said civic education, so have you seen like a civically literate population say, aha, I see this, and it made something better?
Yeah.
Can you give us an example?
You mean in Europe or in France?
Anywhere.
Anywhere. I think about Sweden is a really interesting country. You have highly educated people. You have laws that are really challenging. If you think about the retirement law, it took them 10 years to pass the law because they wanted to engage with the citizens. And they did it for a really long time until they could reach an agreement. And they didn't say, like we do in many countries, okay, we disagree with like 40% of 49% of you, but since we have the majority, we're going to pass the law. They wanted to have, I would say, the broadest as they could engagement and understanding from the citizen. And when they've reached the point where it was like 60, 70, even more percent of the population who were in favor of the law, they passed it.
Okay, so to summarize, if I can, if this man was king, the first thing he would do as king is broad civic literacy, and the benefit of that would be more nuanced cooperative policy making. I think that's a lovely vision. Thank you for sharing. Okay, you sir. If you're king.
Yeah. So I'll stick to my and refer to my previous position. There might be some collateral damage related to adopting this full transparency formula.
No, it doesn't. But anything.
And I can see it in my country
wanted to do.
as we speak. I mean, as of now, there is one huge judicial operation going on in Brazil, so-called car wash operation. And a lot of politicians are now naked. I mean, everyone knows what they have done in the past. There are charges of corruption affecting everyone. Four former Brazilian presidents are now being investigated. And the consequence of it, the practical consequence, is the absolute lack of trust in political institutions. I don't see it as positively as many outside of Brazil, in Europe, in North America, because I see things happening in the country, and I don't know how we're going to reconstruct our political institutions in the mid-run. I really don't see how. I mean, this is one legacy we will have to come to terms with, and one can claim it's part of the pain of growth, the pain of development, but still I think we should be more cautious when applying this idea of, being fully transparent, because at the end of the day, it's a basic political instinct.
So if you were king of Brazil, which would be a really fun job, the thing that you would do is you would not have this car washing thing which wipes away someone's past so they can still be a politician.
Not exactly.
If they had committed corruption in the past, you'd say, no, you can't do that, and we're still going to charge you. And that you think would do the best for transparency.
Because,
it could be. I don't know. It's your idea.
Politicians will always have the national interest argument. I mean, they always find safe haven in this kind of rhetorical argument. So implementing this kind of rule should always take into consideration the consequences that might come about. And I'm not sure politicians and judges and the people, the ruling elite in my country, were aware of the consequences beforehand. And now we have to try to find ways to escape the situation.
All right.
Go slow.
Yeah, maybe going slow would be a possibility.
I think.
Yeah, because we are imploding our institutions. It's a fact. I mean, one can tell by reading the news, by reading the newspapers, by watching the news. Brazil is in a very bad shape when it comes to institutions. So I don't know. I don't know the solution if I were a king, but maybe going slow.
Yeah.
And we could try something and see what happens next. I don't know. It's a tough. I'm an academic, so you are the guys who lead the world.
Okay.
I'm just studying politics.
One for civic education, one for going slow, and if you were queen of Israel, which I don't think you guys have had in like 3,000 years or so.
We don't have a queen or a king in our country.
What is the one big thing you would do that you think would solve the most problems through transparency?
Well, while you were talking, I made an imaginary list. But I think the one thing I would do was to mix the different sectors. I would take people from the tech industry and from technology, and people from the public sector, and teachers, educators, and doctors, and politicians, and change their locations. I would get the technological people to sit in the public sector and try to solve the biggest problems that we have today in healthcare, in education, and really to imagine what a utopian system is supposed to look like. And I would take the politicians and the public sector officials and move them to innovative places in the private sector to see how this is going on. And educators I would put also in the public sector. I think that this mixing and creating these hubs of ideas is the way that we can really solve problems. We have so much opportunities to take today to take the best of technology in order to make politics better. But unfortunately, if you ask most of the tech people, and Israel is the startup nation, we have loads of them. If you ask them if they want to come to the public sector, they would say, what, government? Politics is corrupt and too slow. Public sector is not enough money. Slow processes, we can do better from the outside. And they can do a lot from the outside, but I see what's happening inside the system. And eventually, if you want to have a good education system that can really tackle the challenges that we have today in Israel and the challenges that we have today in the world, we need the best minds to sit in the public sector. And we need to create the atmosphere and the environment for them to be able to work within the public sector and invent constantly better systems. We need the most courageous people to sit in government and in parliament in order to make courageous decisions and not only look at polls before to see where the wind is blowing before they're making decisions about our lives. So if we change that, we will get a much better system for all of us.
And same response that I had to the first speaker. The rule with this question is if you become queen or king and you have this great idea, you want to mix people around, what is one example that you have seen in Israel in which this mixing of folks has done something that inspired you to have that be your moonshot?
I see it in my day-to-day work. When I first got and sat on the finance committee of parliament, I realized that the entire budget was non-transparent and loads of money that could be used to make healthcare better and education better was just fell and was trapped by political cronyism and political interests. So I had to create, and nobody was interested in the budget. Sometimes in the committee there was only one politician sitting, voting alone, and journalists didn't even enter the committee to see what's going on in these budget transfers. So what I did was to put all the information I got from the committee online on my Facebook page, ask people to come and help me. There were 120 people who came on the first day to investigate into the budget. And then we built, together with a lot of tech people and the civil society organizations, we built an app that allowed me to sit on the committee with my computer and see all the information immediately on my computer, even before the Treasury people were giving it to me. And we exposed everything to the public to get more and more people interacting with that. When there were problems on the committee and some of the coalition members didn't want to vote appropriately, I could expose the committee using, again, my Facebook or my Twitter account and just film everything and show it to the public. And eventually the public pressure that came from the outside allowed us to change the system completely. Today, all the budget is transparent, is online. People can see everything that's going on with our tax money immediately. They can see the expenditure. They can see how ministers are spending our money and if it's done efficiently or not. We can stop corruption by creating these tools for transparency. And this is easy, seriously. It took a while, but it was easy to do using technology and using the ideas of the civil society, of the public collaborating. Yeah. And this is a small challenge. Now just think about the bigger challenges that we have, the security challenges we have, and we see very strong collaboration between our security tech people and our military and the government. If you take that and you move it to the education field, we can make miracles happen. But we just need to give the right people the incentives to take part in political procedures and to use technology in order to make our life better.
That's a lovely vision. Okay, so to summarize, we have as king and or queen, or king or queen, we'd have one person who did civic education. We had one person who would go kind of slow, feel things out. And then another one, they'd mix the public sector and the private sector, which makes, in America, the idea of Mark Zuckerberg becoming president a wonderful idea. Okay. So then we'll go down the line. And feel free to talk about what you want.
I have to fix this. It's not in this sense. It's in the sense of making the private sector interested in
Making the
what's going
private
on
sector
politically,
interested.
not in order to achieve their own corporate interests, but in order to achieve the interests of the broad society.
Yeah.
That's the idea of that. So if
Got it.
Mark Zuckerberg is up to that, that's a whole different question.
Yeah,
I was being cheeky.
I think something which is interesting is basically to do in the real life and in the political world what we actually are doing in the startup life. You know, meaning thinking what we call total design or project. You know, you do co-creation. You put together people from different stakeholders, and you say, okay, just solve it. Because politics is a lot about we are all lawyers, you know, coming to politics, and we're going to solve problems from people from different spaces, so to say. And I think it's a real change. It's something that's completely different to try to co-create politician solution. And I think it's interesting that we don't do it in the politician world. We don't even think about doing co-creation at the parliament in anywhere. And an initiative I'm pushing in Paris, actually in France, is basically to say, above the law, there is the experience design. You know, so better than doing law, just try to make it, bring together people. If you think about improving healthcare, just take, you know, doctors, designer, coders, patients, put them together, and once they've created an experience, we're going to do the real regulation so that it works. And it's completely different, and it works.
Lovely. Okay, so we have 6 minutes and 40 seconds, so I'm going to open up to audience questions. First of all, let me just get a raise of hands. Who would like to ask a question or say something? We have one person. That may take a couple minutes. Anyone else? You guys are happy to listen? We have two people. We got two people. Okay, that's good for 6 minutes. All right. So I will call on both of you. I only have one rule as a moderator. Your question must be asked in under 30 seconds. If it takes longer than 30 seconds, I will cut you off because this is a question. So that said, you can give microphone to this guy.
I'll time myself. I worked on anti-corruption for many years. I'm working in tech now. This is a conversation that's been had a long time. How do you see new technologies taking this discussion forward to move from transparency to accountability? Because they're two different things. So you can have a lot of information out there. We saw that in Brazil. We saw in Mexico, governments are completely corrupt, complete human rights violations outside the EU context. How does new technologies, AI, other things like that, big blockchain technologies, how can this move us to a better scenario than having a conversation that we had 10 years ago? Thanks.
Thank you.
You made a great point. We didn't speak about technology, but actually, if you think about credit carbon, there were huge scandals in Europe with these credit carbons. And if we had blockchain, it wouldn't have happened. And I think it's we need to have the intelligence to bring in the people from the startup scene into the political debate. And, you know, Laurence Lessig said once, code as law. I think it was like almost 20 years ago. And we didn't get it in first place at the political stage. So we need to bring in these people so that we make sure that they can be part of the global design, as I just said.
So whenever I join this kind of forum, I always defend one idea, only one. And this time, the idea is we should take care, we should be more attentive to implementation and not expect from machines, institutional devices, whatever, to be, you know, self-implemented, or political processes to be conducted by them. So what do I mean by that? We should take care of this state-society relationship first, and it fully applies to the context where I live. Tech would just amplify old trends and some deeply rooted practices, but would not bring solutions. We should be more attentive to state-society relations at first. That's my point today.
Excellent. And finally.
Accountability is a matter of changing habits. So if only a few years ago, creating more transparent mechanisms in politics was something that people even didn't get for granted. They thought that, why would, I mean, and I heard that a lot. When I started to expose the state budget, I heard many times an excuse that goes like, but the public is not interested in reading the small numbers of the budget, or the public maybe doesn't know how to do that. Now we know that this is bullshit, that the public is interested in what's happening with our tax money, and that it's possible to make it a much clearer thing to understand and read if we use technology properly. But what we now have to change in terms of accountability is the habits. We need to educate politics, and we need to educate the public and civil society to expect more accountability. And this means that we have to stop avoiding politics. When I look at the education system and I see how the education system is escaping politics, I see how sometimes the media is not standing there to stop all of that post-truth idea by challenging politicians using the facts and using facts and figures, the real facts of what's going on. We have to do this and encourage it as a public. We have to encourage it inside our education system, and we have to encourage it if we have to change politics. We shouldn't give up to this fake news or post-truth age. We have today the tools and the technology to change that and to fight politicians who are lying to the public. We just have to use it more often.
Okay, we're out of time, so we didn't get to the last question, but feel free to come up to the speakers afterwards, because I'm sure it's a wonderful question you can ask personally. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. That concludes our discussion on transparency. I hope you learned something.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. Good job.
Okay, free to go.